draw inspiration from his amazing example of leadership and dedication to what is right. So I'd ask you now to join me in welcoming Dr. Asher Kaufman. He's the John M. Regan Jr., Director of the Kroc Institute for International Peace Studies, and Asher will then provide a more thorough introduction of our distinguished guest. Asher.
Thank you, Father Dowd. And to all of you, good afternoon, and welcome to the 31st Annual Hesburgh Lecture in Ethics and Public Policy, part of this year's University Forum Series. My name is Asher Kaufman, and I'm the director of the Kroc Institute for International Peace Studies, part of the Keough School of Global Affairs at Notre Dame, and named after our benefactor, Mrs. John B. Kroc. The Kroc Institute established the annual Hesburgh Lecture in 1995 in honor of Reverend Theodore M. Hesburgh, who was educated at Notre Dame and the Gregorian University in Rome. Father Hesburgh, better known to many of us as Father Ted, was ordained as priest of the Congregation of the Holy Cross in Sacred Heart Church in 1943. At the age of 35, in June 1952, he was named the 15th president of Notre Dame and served in that capacity for 35 years until 1987. And last month, on February 26, marked the 10th anniversary of his death in 2015 at the age of 1907. Father Ted built the modern Notre Dame, overseeing not only the rise to prominence of the university in the ranks of American higher education, but also the transfer of university governance from the founding religious community, the Congregation of the Holy Cross, to a predominantly lay board of trustees in 1967, and the admission of women to the undergraduate program in 1972. Commitment to peace and justice and to exploring the ethical dimensions of public policy characterize Father Ted's career. As a charter member and chair of the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights, as a member of President Gerald Ford's Presidential Clemency Board, as a member of the board of the Overseas Development Council, as chair of the Select Commission on Immigration and Refugee Policy, and as a member of a coalition of scientists and world religious leaders in condemning nuclear weapons. He was the recipient of the Medal of Freedom, the nation's highest civilian honor, bestowed upon him by President Lyndon Johnson in 1964, and the Congressional Gold Medal bestowed upon him by President Bill Clinton and congressional leaders in July 2000. Father Hesburgh was also involved in the establishment of the United States Institute of Peace in 1984 and served as a member of the board of directors from 1991 to 2000, and as co-chairman of the USIP building campaign. At the groundbreaking ceremony, Hesburgh said, "Amidst all these reliquaries of wars, we are going to commit a temple of peace." A hall was named in honor of Father Hesburgh to house the Institute's Religion and Peacemaking Center. As we all know, this is the center that is now targeting by this US administration. You might imagine that I'm intentional in mentioning this in my presentation. Father Hesburgh envisioned the Kroc Institute to be a center of learning and training for peace builders from around the world who would come to Notre Dame, be educated in the field of peace studies, and return to their homes to advance peace and justice and form a strong global network of peace builders. His motto, "Peace is the work of justice," continues to be the lightning rod of the Institute's research, teaching, practice, and outreach. As for the network he envisioned, the Kroc Institute now has more than 2,000 alumni from our undergraduate and graduate programs, many of whom work on peace and justice around the world, as well as in the United States and locally here in South Bend. For more than 3 decades, this lecture series has honored Father Hesburgh, using open-ended inquiry, assessing and taking values seriously, and cherishing wisdom. Our lecture series has featured a variety of thinkers, authors, and activists, to mention very few, including the following: Leima Eboe, Liberian peace activist and the 2011 Nobel Peace Prize laureate; the Honorable Juan Manuel Santos, former president of Colombia and the 2016 Nobel Peace Prize laureate; Bernardine Evaristo, Booker Prize winning novelist, essayist, dramatist, literary critic, and advocate and activist for inclusion in the arts; Angela Davis, world-renowned scholar, activist, and leader in the struggle for economic, racial, and gender justice; public intellectual, Cornel West; Beatrice Finn, executive director of the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, which received the 2017 Nobel Peace Prize; author Amitav Ghosh, who was honored with the 54th Jnanpith Award in 2018, India's highest literary honor; an author and environmentalist, Bill McKibben, among many others, thought leaders, and I can go on and on. And to this distinguished list, we now add Dr. Daniel Allen. Dr. Allen's effort to make the world a better place for young people has taken her from teaching college and leading a 60 million university division to driving change at the helm of a 6 billion foundation, writing as a national opinion columnist, and advocating for strong public health policy, democracy renovation, civic education, and sound governance of and with new technology. At the height of the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020, her leadership to rally coalitions and build solutions resulted in the country's first ever roadmap to pandemic resilience, which was adopted in federal legislation and by a presidential executive order. She was the 2020 winner of the Library of Congress Kluge Prize, which recognizes scholarly achievement in disciplines not covered by the Nobel Prize. She received the honor, and I quote, for internationally recognized scholarship in political theory and her commitment to improving democratic practice and civic education. Given the threat to democracy around the world, including here in the United States, the relevance of her work to meet challenges within this environment is both timely and critical. And now, for the reason you are all here, Dr. Allen will present Dr. Allen will present so long as I'm not being taken by somebody with a mask somewhere simply because of my accent. And now, for the reason you're all here, Dr. Allen will present Bringing Democracy Back from the Brink, a strategic vision and call to action for the next 45 minutes or so, followed by a 30-minute Q&A with Dr. Mary Gallagher, the Marilyn Keough Dean of the Keough School of Global Affairs. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Daniel Allen to the podium.
Good afternoon. Thank you. Yeah, well, there you go. Thank you. Good afternoon. Look at that. It's really good to be here. I enjoy coming to this campus immensely. I really loved my visit in September 2023. And so thank you very much, Father Dowd, President Dowd, for your wonderful framing remarks and for, I was going to point to the question, what do we owe one another? That wasn't quite right. Was that the question? I'm just so glad that that is a question that you're focused on as a campus and as a community. It's a question that we would all benefit from much more consistent reflection on. I'm grateful to have the chance to talk with you today about constitutional democracy and its future. I provided this title many months ago, it has to be said. And so the context has changed considerably. I have been talking for quite some time about work that I call democracy renovation. And for me, that is usually about two things. One, civic education, reconnecting people to their civic experience, power and responsibility, and grounding that in knowledge. And then renovating our institutions so that they are responsive and work well for people. And I focus typically on the state level. And I will say something about both of those things today, but it's hard given our broader context not to be honest about our broader context and talk about that too. So I am going to look at the big picture today in my remarks. And I also wanted to name, Father Dowd said how important it was for us all to think about the basic structure of rights and what does it take to understand them, name them, speak up for them, and the like. I want to express my gratitude to universities for the ways in which they protect the right of academic freedom. And so I invoke that right today in my presentation. It is my presentation. I do not speak for the university. I want to make that very, very clear. But universities are such important institutions for civil society in making space for a huge range of opinion, for debate, in the job of seeking understanding, which we do together. So what's one of the things we owe to each other? It is to talk honestly and completely about what we see in the world around us, what we see. There she is. Sorry, my niece is here, and I've been wondering where she was. Thank you, Emma. What do we owe each other? Again, that frank conversation, a complete conversation, and one that is also about our core respect for the sacred human dignity of everybody else that we're in conversation with. So I'm grateful to Notre Dame for making spaces like that real in the world, and grateful to share such a space with you today. So, bringing democracy back from the brink. Why do I care? I care partly as a matter of my basic family inheritance. And those of you whom I spoke with last year will remember that I am from a family that has been committed to democracy, self-government, and empowerment for generations. My granddad on my dad's side helped found one of the first NAACP chapters in Northern Florida in the 40s. That was super dangerous work. Lynchings were on the rise at the time. So here was somebody who was literally trading in his material security for the sake of ensuring that institutions would work to protect freedom, to put the power of the vote in people's hands for real. On my mother's side, my great-grandparents helped fight for women's right to vote. So my great-granddad marched with suffragettes on Boston Common in 1917. And that was partly because my great-grandmother was busy having a baby, and she really wanted to make sure somebody was there to stand up for the cause of the family. So across generations, we in our family, my extended family, have taught about the importance of taking responsibility, not only for your own individual life or even for your family's life, but also for the life of your community, and expecting to play a role as a responsible participant in shaping with others the possibilities that we all have for healthy communities. That has meant a lot to me my whole life. As I have become older and came up in the world, I came to understand that not everybody had the chance to have that same richness of education just from family context as I had. So whereas for me, democracy was something I took for granted in its value, and the kinds of learning that you need to sustain it I took for granted, I realized not everybody had access to that. And there are many different ways we can tell the story of that fact. I often point out that there's a stunning fact that for generations born before World War II, roughly 70% of the members of that generation consider it essential to live in a democracy. In contrast, for folks who are 40 and under, not quite 30% consider it essential to live in a democracy. And this is a US phenomenon, but not just a US phenomenon. It's across the globe. There has been a change across generations in terms of the degree of sense of strong connection to the life of self-government, both the empowering aspects of that and also the responsibilities that go along with that. And of course, you can't maintain the project of self-government for free and equal citizens if rising generations don't actually believe in it, don't feel connected to it, and the like. So that is what has brought me over time to the work of democracy renovation. And again, for me, it is both about civic education and about our institutions. In terms, though, of understanding where we are now and how to put that all in a bigger context, I like to start with this graph from a scholar at Princeton about close presidential elections in 2 gilded ages, as he puts it. So what this graph is showing you is the relationship between the popular vote and the Electoral College result or outcome. And so those red dots are points in time where whoever won the presidency actually lost the popular vote, but won the Electoral College. And that is something that has happened more frequently recently. The last time there was that sort of frequency was at the end of the 19th century, which was a surprisingly similar period of time to our current moment. The Gilded Age called that because of incredible rising inequality of income and wealth and disparities of power that then also tracked those kinds of contrasts. So we are living through a time in which our society is under incredible pressure because of broad socioeconomic changes. Those changes, the pressures we're under, are also technological. Actually, go ahead to this one. Anybody know what this is a picture of? This is Tennessee, right? Tennessee Valley Authority Dam. So this is a reminder of the point in time when the world was electrified. And I mean that literally, right? Okay, not just excited, but where electricity moved all the way through all human activities. There was just a time before electricity and a time after electricity. There was a time of horse and buggies, and then there was a time of cars. There was a time when women spent hours and hours over tubs doing laundry or going down to the river doing laundry, and then there were washing machines, and women could enter the workplace. Everything changed when the electricity came. Everything is changing now because of AI. We are living through an age of equivalent transformation to the age of the arrival of electricity. And when everything changes, it puts a lot of pressure on systems of governance. One of the things that we're watching right now in the world is that autocratic systems, where we're seeing an increasing number of those, are in some sense moving faster to master new technologies and to use them for their governing purposes. And we've struggled in democracies to fully understand the full impact of technology and then how to make sure our governing institutions can actually handle it. So this is where my story is going to surprise you a little bit. My story today about the strains our democracy are under is a story about the huge impact of technology in our world. It has changed the economy. It is driving the very significant, unprecedented levels of migration that we see across the globe. It is changing the distribution of power in a huge number of contexts. So it's having a huge impact. And really, it's the story right now of what's happening in our democracy. So that's the story I want to call your attention to. I'm going to ask you to take it seriously and then think with you in our discussion about what we can do about it. Now, this January 20th executive order from the president established DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency. And an interesting feature of the establishment of DOGE was that it was actually taking over the pre-existing US digital services. So it is really specifically a vehicle for taking over the technological apparatus of the government, putting that technological apparatus in the hands of, as you know, an unelected individual, Elon Musk. It is the consequences of this that I think are actually the most serious issues for our democracy right now. DOGE, when it was set up, this is its current website. This is what the website looks like. This is a US government website. Its iconography is the iconography of crypto, right? You sort of recognize the aesthetics of it. That's the aesthetics of cryptocurrency. The cryptocurrency Dogecoin looks like this. And when, on the first day that Doge was set up, what was on this site was not that crypto-stylized dollar sign, but the Doge sign, the actual Dogecoin sign for about 24 hours, and then it was taken down again. So in other words, I'm sharing that just so you have clear awareness of how closely the world of cryptocurrencies and the like, cryptocurrency aesthetics and so forth, is at the center of the work of DOGE, okay? So what do we make of this? What is DOGE exactly? What is it? How does it relate to the health of our democracy? What do you see when you look at this? Shout it out. A rabbit, a duck, rabbit, duck. Right, which one is it, okay? So this is basically the question we have about DOGE. DOGE's stated mission is for government efficiency. Is that what it's about? Is that a rabbit, which would be a good thing, or is it a duck? And how does DOGE relate to President Trump's agenda? Again, should we understand there to be a positive agenda or something that is problematic? So what I'm going to suggest is that we don't fully know yet what's happening with our government, but there are some clear options. There's a rabbit, which is what the president's stated case is, that he's creating a streamlined, energetic, unitary executive. And that it's a reasonable case. There's reasons to take that seriously. I'll explain what's reasonable about that case. Okay, and so you have to take the rabbit case seriously as a possibility. There are two possible ducks. Duck one is that the sort of really rapid move through taking apart federal agencies and the like, and running over congressional authority and the like actually reflect a monarchical agenda on the part of the president. And I'll say more about what's the evidence for that. And then there's the other duck case, namely that Musk actually has a monarchical agenda. And you can probably tell from just the opening parts of my remarks, but that's actually the case that I would like you to focus on, okay? That is what I actually think our most significant danger is. So back to this picture of the dam. I like this partly because it's beautiful, and it reminds us of how water and its power and force are converted into the power and force of electricity. Data is roughly the same as water in this picture. So AI lives on, is driven by data pools. People talk about data lakes. That is the natural resource created from all of us that powers the new instruments of technology that are producing the capacity to coordinate human activities and tasks at an unprecedented scale. It will change every feature of our economy. It will change all aspects of how we all do our work. It will change education across the board. Now, what the DOGE sort of access to all the data systems of the US government represent is access to the single most valuable data pool in the world. Now, that data pool can support, wrong way. That data pool then is valuable and useful for a number of different reasons. Every AI system is trained on data, and AI systems get their competitive advantage from the quality of their data pool. So having Elon Musk have access to this when he's also in the business of building an AI company is to give him incredible competitive advantage over all of his competitors. All of that data in our governmental systems, of course, also makes any one of us fully exposable, fully targetable in those instances where there's any sort of political enmity or opposition that has emerged. There are very serious concerns around privacy that are connected to the data that is held across from the Treasury to Social Security to Health and Human Services and the like. So it's all of our private data which is in that data pool. Now, as I've said, technology is driving really dramatic changes in our economy. It's part of the story of globalization. It's part of the story as we watch communications infrastructure change around the globe and the like. And what we've been watching in our politics is a real debate over alternative political economy paradigms that might be used to navigate the moment that we're in. So I want to name three competing paradigms that we've been asked to think about. We were asked to think about them in the election. We're being asked to think about them now in the current moment. And they each, have reasons behind them of various kinds. So President Biden, his approach to the moment that we find ourselves in was to really focus on the development of industrial policy, trying to reverse some of the dynamics of globalization by reinvesting in American industries. He combined that with a strong emphasis on regulation, the kinds of regulation, for example, that the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau produced, whose purpose was to make sure that ordinary consumers had protection in the face of the powers of financial organizations with real concentrations of power. He also had a paradigm that was about saving democracy via prosecutions, a sort of really aggressive use of prosecutions. And we've seen a lot of criticism of that. All right, so that's sort of one paradigm for how to navigate the moment we're in, where we're seeing strain in our institutions. Second paradigm, coming from President Trump, focuses on mercantilism, right? That's what we're watching with tariffs, the effort to sort of disentangle the US economy from a structure of global relations and really try to, in a sort of autarkic way, rebuild industry here at home. That's connected with deregulation and connected with the idea of a unitary executive, which, talk a bit more about this, but has the purpose of trying to take all the sort of independent agencies that Congress has set up and really make them part of the executive branch, to see executive power as a single unified branch. And then lastly, the third paradigm represented by Musk is really quite different in kind. And it's captured well in a book called The Network State by somebody named Balaji Srinivasan, who focuses on the way in which you should accelerate technological development in order to produce alternative ways of doing everything that human beings do, including govern themselves, so that all the old ways of doing things will look just creaky and broken and not very useful. In the same way that a horse and buggy, who wants to get into a horse and buggy, right? Doesn't look like a very comfortable way of riding down the road. You'd much rather get into a car. And so the idea is that for every single human function, we can accelerate technology, create a new way of doing it, replace all those existing forms. You need to unleash capital to do that in order to get the most development from technology you can. This is sort of the accelerationist paradigm of technology development, it's called. And the people who are most talented should be the people who are put in the positions to do that. They should, as in the part of all of the reinvention that they're doing, also be able to reinvent the structures of governance through networked tech communities that can work together with new instruments and tools. And you will get rid of the need for democracy. You'll replace that with essentially network tech structures of governance for all human functions and human jurisdictions. That is the world that Musk has been in and is a part of. I'll say more about that in a second. So now let's just go in a little more deeply into the rabbit case. All right, this is where what we're watching, does make sense. There's a lot of good that might be done, and we should take it seriously. So the president has issued a lot of executive orders. One called Ensuring Accountability for All Agencies is key, and then another one called Ensuring Lawful Governance and Implementing the President's Department of Government Efficiency Deregulatory Initiative. Those are the ones to focus on, so I'd encourage you to look them up. But what they do is articulate the theory of the case. The Constitution vests all executive power in the president and charges him with faithfully executing the laws. Since it would be impossible for the president to single-handedly perform all the executive business of the federal government, the Constitution also provides for subordinate officers to assist the president in his executive duties. In the exercise of their often considerable authority, these executive branch officials remain subject to the president's ongoing supervision and control. It sounds straightforward, and in many ways it is. It reflects the 3 articles of the Constitution. And what it is a response to the fact that over the course of the 20th century, you can reasonably say that a 4th branch of government has come into existence. That 4th branch being the administrative state. All the independent agencies, the EPA, the Federal Reserve, you sort of go down the list of all of them. And this is an accurate view of the structure of our government. In the civic education work that I do, we do now teach that there aren't 3 branches of government, that there's a 4th branch, the administrative agencies, and you have to understand how they work too if you're going to understand the structure of government. And so there's a case to be made that letting all those independent agencies emerge has actually been eroding the basic 3-branch structure of the Constitution, and that you should reincorporate those independent agencies under the authority of the executive, all right? And in very significant ways, I agree with the president on that point, okay? I want to just, for the record, say that. Now, the places where we appear to disagree are that, in my view, when that authority is brought back in, It's actually Congress's authority that needs to be rebuilt. It's not that you want to bring everything the agencies are doing back to the executive. The agencies produce a lot of regulations, for example. That regulatory authority is the equivalent of making laws. So in my view, that authority should come back to Congress rather than coming into the executive. But that's where the debate is. But the fact that there's an issue here is real, right? There is real work to be done to think about how do we really want all those independent agencies to operate. All right. Now, the president also says through his legal officials that the executive branch takes seriously its constitutional duty to comply with the orders of Article 3 courts, okay? In other words, the president's stated agenda is that he's going to consolidate independent agencies under executive authority, restore Article 1 authority to the executive branch, and he will do that while respecting the separation of powers. He will respect the courts, the Supreme Court, and the like, okay? So that is, if what we're watching is the rabbit, that's the shape of the rabbit. That makes sense? Okay. So let's move on to the ducks and then try to figure out how we can distinguish whether what we're watching is a rabbit or a duck. So the Wall Street Journal, I think, very helpfully said, one challenge in the Trump era is distinguishing when the president is popping off for attention from when his remarks indicate a real change in policy and priorities. So the first duck case is what I call the president's popping off agenda, okay? So, you know, President Trump does like to talk about having a third term, okay? It comes up all the time. It came up at the Conservative Political Action conference. He has been reported to have said that he thinks the way he could get a third term is by being somebody's vice president on the ticket. That would not then be out of sync with the constitutional requirement he can't run again. He would be running as vice president, and then that person would step down immediately. So there is a real conversation happening about the third term idea, but maybe it's the president's popping off agenda, because obviously it, winds people up, that theme when it comes up. All right, hard to know how to take that one. So let's go to the other duck case, which is to focus in on Musk and precisely what he's doing in his role at DOGE. So I want to say more about this issue of data and why thinking about Musk matters. As I mentioned, sort of the access to those data pools provides a competitive advantage for anybody developing an AI company. It provides an ability to make use of data in ways that are privacy violating and the like. And you might ask, well, okay, but maybe that's okay if there are guardrails, right? Maybe, we do have various norms around privacy and laws around privacy and so forth. So, well, if those apply to DOGE and to Musk, then, what's the big deal? The short answer is they don't apply. None of those rules that we're used to thinking of for data protection or for protecting against, say, antitrust or insider activity or collusion, none of them apply to DOGE. Which means if we want to know what DOGE is doing, it depends entirely on the question of Elon Musk's intentions. You could take all the tools that he's bringing to bear, AI tools, and be motivated entirely by a purpose of efficiency and better functioning of the government and deliver that public good. You could do that, all right? But if your intentions are different, then you could also take all those tools and power and deliver something else. So that's why we actually have to take the time to understand Musk's intentions. So I mentioned already, just to name some of the issues, I mentioned already the issue of competitive advantage and surveillance targeting of enemies. It is the case that Musk has already, on X, used information from the work that they've been doing at DOGE to target people who have criticized him. And he does spur doxing online in ways that are very dangerous for people. You may also know that he has commercial interests in China. So that's what this refers to here, global interest counter to U.S. national security. He has very close commercial ties to the Chinese government. You may also know that Starlink, his satellite system, which he built in an astonishing 4-year period, 2019 to 2023. By 2023, he owned and had control over half of the satellites in space. Did you guys know that? It's up to 60%, okay? But that is the world's communications infrastructure, and whoever controls the world's communication infrastructure has significant power over governance operations around the entire globe. So you should know that. That control over Starlink has included decisions about the use of Starlink in Ukraine and Russia that have had battlefield consequences, okay? So those are the powers that are available to us. They're literally at his fingertips. So this is when we have to dive deep into the world of technology to understand his intentions. Because there are really 3 competing paradigms in the world of technology for what we should be doing with the power of technology, how it should be developed, who should be in charge of it, and so forth. And those 3 paradigms are the NRX paradigm. That's the label they've given it to themselves. NRX is short for neo-reactionary. There's the effective altruism paradigm, and then there's what's called the plurality and digital democracy paradigm. And they're each represented by one of the figures here. Elon Musk for NRX, Sam Altman for effective altruism, and Audrey Tang for plurality and digital democracy. So Sam Altman runs OpenAI. That is the firm that released ChatGPT, which sort of launched this whole new moment that we're in. And Audrey Tang was the first digital minister for Taiwan. And has, in some sense, digitized Taiwanese government, both civic participation and how the government delivers services to constituents. So precisely what are these competing paradigms? So I already referred to this book by Balaji Srinivasan about the network state. No, I don't have it there yet. Sorry, okay. So that is the core idea in NRX, again, namely that technology can produce networked technological communities. For example, crypto blockchain communities are those networked states. They can develop their own governance mechanisms and build out functionalities that can replace analog versions of functionality. You'll have seen in the NRX universe a lot of experiments with new kinds of cities and places. For a while, they were trying to build new societies on floating islands at sea. There's a bunch of really strange experiments with how to organize society going on in that NRX community. They have a very IQ-oriented picture of who should be in charge. So people with high IQ should be invested in to develop new technologies, and they also should be the people who run government. High IQ people should rule over low IQ people. The effective altruism picture is one that also sees the power of technology to transform the economy and the likelihood that its transformative powers will result in huge amounts of wealth for a small number of people, those who control this process of acceleration. They have some kind of basic idea about human moral equality, human moral dignity, and so they worry that the result of this will be many, many people will be displaced from the labor market, won't have the chance to participate in the productive economy, and so the solution to that is to give everybody a universal basic income. So some people make huge amounts of money, as we're watching in the sort of tech industry, and then that gets redistributed in the form of universal basic income. So it's also, like the NRX vision, a very top-down vision, where technologists consolidate control, consolidate capital, but in their case, they combine it with this view that everybody should get more or less a payout from that. The plurality view is a very different kind of view. It takes a view about technology as being about human flourishing. Fancy that. What an idea that you might think about how to use technology to develop it for human flourishing. Starts with a view about basic human moral equality, about the value of the many different kinds of intelligence that human beings bring to the table. There isn't some singular intelligence that AI is just going to sort of meet and match and then replace. And it's a picture where technology sort of by, for, and of the people, so very oriented towards decentralized approaches to technology development, very supportive of open source technology development, as opposed to the OpenAI kind of we're not going to share our language model, our LLMs with other people and so forth. So a real open picture. And it's a paradigm that also believes in self-governance, where democracy is actually seen as a valuable human technology that human beings have developed to figure out how people with really differing perspectives can come together and make decisions about what we owe one another in order to have a shared life. So those are the three competing tech paradigms that most people have not really heard of. But if you're in the world of technology, these are debates about which approach should be used to frame tech development. The people connected to the first include not only Musk, but others of his colleagues from PayPal. That's Peter Thiel on the left. Peter Thiel and David Sachs, who is President Trump's crypto czar. All three of them were at PayPal together. All three of them also were raised in South Africa. And that South African experience is a part of the picture that they're bringing to the table, okay? Balaji Srinivasan is the person in the middle, and then there's Curtis Yarvin, who is the sort of, as he calls himself, philosopher of the movement. He is the person who has most explicitly made the pro-monarchy arguments. And there's a long interview with him in the New York Times that you can go read if you want to. But when I use the monarchy word, I'm not attributing, it's not me applying that word to their views. They are explicit that the goal is monarchy and replacing democracy, okay? So a couple of examples. This is Peter Thiel. Peter Thiel was J.D. Vance's backer. So when J.D. Vance won the Senate, Thiel put $10 million into that race, and so Thiel is Vance's most important backer. The fate of our world may depend on the effort of a single person who builds or propagates the machinery of freedom that makes the world safe for capitalism. Okay, that's what I mean, where capitalism is the end goal, as opposed to being something that supports us in developing or working towards human flourishing. It becomes the end in itself. And that commitment is really sort of core to, I would say, the kind of moral erosion that is in that paradigm. Thiel also wrote in that same essay, since 1920, the vast increase in welfare beneficiaries and the extension of the franchise to women, two constituencies that are notoriously tough for libertarians, have rendered the notion of capitalist democracy into an oxymoron. And what he means by that is that women, for example, in his conception, are by and large not the property holders, not the holders of capital. And so when you give women the right to vote, you no longer have a democracy where capital holds all the voting rights in the democracy. So that's what he's objecting to here, okay? So I mentioned Balaji already and his book, The Network State, How to Start a New Country. It's really literally a blueprint for taking control of data systems and technology in order to reorganize functions and take governance control over specific jurisdictions. So one of the important things that's happening with DOGE right now is that they have actually fired all of the digital security people in the government and replaced them with themselves, okay? So the Signal Gate situation that we're watching, Elon Musk has been assigned to investigate what happened there. Sorry, that wasn't even meant as a joke. But partly that's because digital security people have been removed from agencies across the government, okay? So this is what I mean about, there's just like a lot to understand about what's actually happening that really merits our attention. So back to Curtis Yarvin, the philosopher. So as I said, he's been explicit, and his vocabulary is that citizens will become state slaves. And he does say things like, because everything rots when it has no owner, human beings included. So he draws a lot on Aristotle's originally old theory of natural slavery. Some people are naturally born to rule and others are naturally born to be slaves. And his theory is that those folks who are the technological sort of superstars with superpowers are those natural rulers. Most of the rest of us are natural slaves. And we should get rid of democracy because it's a farce and replace it with rule by a tech CEO. I didn't say it. I'm not making this up. So Yes, so he has a blog. That's what the reference to Gray Mirror is. So please go check it out, and you'll see the nature of the arguments. He's calling for a full reboot of the U.S. government. We can only do this by giving absolute sovereignty to a single organization. And he writes about the model being where you'd have a board chair working with an experienced executive. And so the basic idea is that Trump is the board chair and Musk is the executive. Okay. So that leads us to the question of how can we tell the difference between these things? How would we know whether we're on the rabbit path or the duck path? All right. And the answer is we are on the rabbit path if all the things that go with a reasonable and appropriate approach to a unitary executive happen. So for example, if the Trump administration gets a ruling against them by the Supreme Court and follows it, that's evidence that we're on the rabbit path. Okay? So that's the thing to really be paying close attention to. What happens with Supreme Court decisions and what does the Trump administration do? If the Trump administration can support reanimation of Congress, so it's not just about consolidation of power into the executive, we're on the rabbit path, right? Maintaining 3 branches of government, separation of powers. If there are formal limits put on DOGE's authority, if there were actual ethics disclosures that were required, actual privacy protections that were required, we would be on the rabbit path. And I will say, we have had some evidence of that. So for example, you may remember the news story when Elon Musk was going to get a briefing from the Defense Department about war plans with China, and then it was canceled. That was putting limits on DOGE's authority in that little moment. It was a small moment. It was a little hard to see in the news, but that's what was happening there. If the government were to get more serious about using cryptography with regard to how our data is housed and used, we'd be on the rabbit path. If Musk's role has a term limit and it ends and he moves on, rabbit path. If there were a ceasing of the use of data on X for doxing people, rabbit path. And I'll add to that, if due process rights hold, rabbit path. Okay? But those are the things we need to be paying attention to, I would say. So, in addition to asking you to pay attention, there's also the question of, what's to be done. And this is where I'm not actually going to say anything about the federal situation beyond encouraging you to track these indicators for how we would know whether we were on the rabbit path or the duck path. What I'm going to do is come back to think about states with you for a moment, okay? So maybe my last stretch of remarks, and I'm maybe taking slightly too long, but I hope you won't mind if I take a few more minutes here. So we often forget that our national government, our federal government, federal edifice, is made out of the units of states. And at the end of the day, the quality and health of our state governments is, I believe, the single most important factor in determining the quality and health of our national government. So even while there's a heck of a lot going on in DC and a heck of a lot to pay attention to, I want to encourage you to really think about your state government. Is it a model of healthy democracy? Do we have responsive representation at the state level? Do we have engaged citizens who have a good civic education, who are prepared to take responsibility, to work on problem solving with others across lines of difference? If we can do that work and achieve that on the state level, I am pretty sure it will flow through to the federal level. So in that regard, I really think that is the most important place for most of us to pay attention and spend our time. And so I want to spend this is my final little moment thinking about, well, what can be done at the state level? Here you have a picture of 5 states, California, Alaska, Louisiana, Washington, and North Dakota, Nebraska. Rats, I knew it. I knew I was going to mess that up. I always mix up Nebraska and North Dakota. It's just terrible. And don't tell them. Okay? Anyway, the first 4 all have what are called all-party primaries. And then Nebraska has a unicameral state legislature that also has effectively an all-party primary. What's an all-party primary? It means instead of having a Democratic Party primary and a Republican Party primary, you have one ballot in the primary that all candidates run on together, okay? And then in those first 4 states, 2 candidates move on to the general election, and then one of them wins the office. Now, why does this matter? It matters because our party system over the course of the last 70 years has resulted in the capture of our national political institutions by tiny percentages of the electorate. There are 2 things that really matter there. One, gerrymandering, which you all know about, which means that districts are set up at the state level, the state legislatures, and at this point, 85% of congressional districts are not competitive in the general election. They're only competitive in the primary because of gerrymandering. So if you win the primary, you've won the whole election. Now you add to that, that turnout is a lot lower in the primary, okay? And so that means that people can win office just having gotten through a low turnout primary, not having had a competitive general election. As an example, Marjorie Taylor Greene in Georgia is elected by 8% of the electorate in her district. AOC is elected by 5% of the electorate in her district, all right? And when folks are in office, who do they owe their jobs to? Not the people, not the whole people. They owe their jobs to the small percentages of the electorate who turned out in a very partisan primary to vote for them, okay? So when you have an all-party primary, then candidates have to campaign to the whole electorate at both moments. And candidates owe their jobs to the whole electorate at both moments. And it also means your general election campaign is always going to be a competitive election. And so everybody's vote matters. You're not disenfranchised because you weren't participating in the relevant primary that was picking that winner, all right? So this affects the ability of legislators to make decisions with each other. When they don't owe their job to a small subset of the base, when they're not afraid of being primaried by a small subset of the base, they actually have more degrees of freedom for decision making. They can compromise. They can make deals that the majority, that bulk in the middle, are going to think are good deals. As an example, when President Biden was trying to get his debt ceiling deal through, if you look at the states, these states, and look at how Republicans voted on that, 90% of the Republicans from states with all-party primaries voted for the debt ceiling deal. In contrast, in other states with typical party primaries, 60% voted for the deal, all right? So the point is that you change the election mechanism, you change the incentives for elected officials. And at the end of the day, what we really need is to put our political institutions back in the hands of the full, broad American population. Survey after survey actually shows that we have incredibly high levels of agreement on core values. Core views, for example, even civic education, something like 75% of Americans think that kids should get more civic education, and they even agree on what should be in that civic education. It's astonishing. None of that sort of supermajority agreement comes through in our politics. And the reason is because our politics have been captured by how our party system operates. So we've got to reverse the capture. And that means, as a matter of practice, always working to build a supermajority for constitutional democracy, not a bare majority, bridge building across lines of ideological difference. And the supermajority is always going to be both cross-ideological and multiracial. And it is being done. People do it at the state level with some meaningful consistency. We need those institutional changes I mentioned to reconnect politicians to the broad electorate. And we should be aiming at the state level for responsive, transparent, accountable government using these 2 methods. If we could do that, one state after the next, again, I feel very confident that those improvements will flow through to the quality of how our national government behaves. So thank you so much for your time and attention, and I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Thank you so much. Wow. That's not what I was expecting.
I know, I told you times have changed, so it's a little hard to know, what we should talk about, but how can we not talk about what's happening, so.
So, okay, I'm going to just ask a couple of questions, and then I'm going to open it up to the audience, because I bet people have a lot of questions, and have been sitting here very patiently. I study China, so I have a question that really struck me while you were talking. As part of a research project I was doing on attitudes towards China in the United States and Germany, one thing that we discovered by talking to people in focus groups and doing some surveys is that some people in these countries really like a strong leader and might be negative towards China, like might feel China is a threat, but we'll talk about China in very admiring terms. It's a strong country, it's a unified country, Xi Jinping is a strong leader, and Donald Trump has said very similar things about him, that he's a king and he's a strong guy and he controls billions of people with an iron fist. So in relation to some of the things you talked about with this reconceptualization of government by tech bros, let's call them, why is there this desire for a strongman? I think we see this broadly across the globe in the last couple of decades. And that seems to be very much reflected in their ideology as well.
Yeah. It's a great question. And I think I want to go back at one level to the slide I started with, the 2 Gilded Ages. And just think about the amount of transformation and turbulence that the whole globe is experiencing. So in this country, we know, sort of with regard to the economy, that the movement of so many jobs abroad and sort of collapse of various industrial sectors is something that has contributed to rising wealth for the globe as a whole, but a real increase in income disparities inside the United States and a real foreshortening of prospects and potentials for a heck of a lot of Americans. Plateauing of life expectancies, reversal of life expectancies for way too many Americans, so declines in life expectancies. So those are big changes. You add to that the fact of unprecedented levels of human migration around the globe. You add to that the way in which technology is literally transforming how we do everything in our daily life, often producing great frustration for us, certainly in the case of young people, contributing in significant ways to a mental health crisis and the like. And we are really in an era of multiple crises. And I think in such an era, you really want good governance, right? You want effective governance. The Federalist Papers use the word energy for one of the values of government. Government should have energy. It should deliver. It should actually solve problems for us. So I take the appetite for a strong man to be basically that appetite for energy in government. I'll just say one more word, which is just that in the Federalist Papers, it's really important that energy design principle is balanced with the principle of Republican safety, by which is meant protection for the core freedoms that make it possible for people to govern themselves. So that's the hard question. How do we have energy and Republican safety simultaneously? And so the question is, why have the tech bros abandoned Republican safety? But they have.
Exactly. So the end of the talk gave a pretty simple answer about what we could do as citizens in regards to how our voting might change and how our electoral systems might change. What do you think would be sort of what should students and people who are invested in this kind of transformation, what could we do? I mean, what are the steps that we can do?
I appreciate that. Well, one of the things I do encourage people to do is to understand the structure of your state government, which you may be different than the communities I am in most often, but the communities I find myself in, people don't really have a good understanding of their state government. They may not even know who their state legislator is or their state senator. They don't know what the rules are for getting on the ballot. They don't know how to run for office at the local level, at the municipal level, and so forth. Massachusetts, we have a huge problem right now because we have just too many local offices that nobody is running for. So if you want to talk about bringing democracy back from the brink, let's just start there, right? We just need people to run for the basic local offices. And right now, folks don't know how to do that. So I think there is the first most important thing is just that learning and seeing all the places where it's so critical for people to step up and take responsibility. And you do that, and then the next things that are clearly necessary become visible pretty fast.
Okay, well, last question. This is a political science nerd question. Hot take, ranked choice voting, is that also a solution?
I do love ranked choice voting, I will say. I rank it 1, 1, and 1, or whatever. 1, 2, and 3. I'm for ranked choice voting all the way down. But yes, sorry, it was a bad joke. That was a terrible joke. I apologize. That really didn't work. I didn't mention in the Alaska case, the specific election model they use is sort of like the 2.0 version of the all-party primaries, because they take forward not just 2 candidates to the final round, but 4, and then they use ranked choice voting in that final round, where you can list your first choice, your second choice, your third choice. If nobody gets over 50% on the first count, you knock out the last person. Whoever voted for them has their votes reallocated to their second choice person. And you do that till somebody's got more than 50%. Now, there are 2 things to say about why that's so valuable. The first is because the goal is 50%, +1, it changes the dynamics of campaigning. You're campaigning to build coalitions, not kind of crack up the electorate and just try to take the biggest chunk. And then as a concrete example of that, I was talking to a state senator from Alaska who'd campaigned under the old model and now the new model, and she was asked, what was different? And she said, well, she's a Republican. She said, for the first time in my career, I knocked on the doors of Democrats. And they said, well, what are you doing here? And I said, well, I know that we probably don't agree on various things, and I'm probably not your first choice, but I want to be your second choice. So why don't you tell me what's on your mind, and I'll tell you what I'm working on. And so for the first time, she ran a campaign where she was talking across both parties. So imagine that scaled up, right? If we could have campaigns like that consistently around the country, I think it would make a really good difference.
Excellent. Okay, we're going to have some questions, and there are some mics. Okay, I'm going to go to the student right here first, and I'll see some others.
All right, thank you, Dr. Allen. I was very intrigued, or not intrigued, but it caught my attention when you included some of the kind of outlandish quotes from especially Peter Thiel and Chris Yarvin. And I feel like, policy implications aside, I think that kind of encapsulates, the Trump administration in itself. I think many of the officials and kind of Trump himself, one could say the same thing even about the previous administration, but I feel like it's been amplified, especially this time around, with some of the things that they have said that have just been, kind of like, what? So my question, do you think, whether in your research or with people that you've been talking to around the country, are people still taking into consideration maybe things that have been said, by elected officials, or is it more so now starting to become like, one issue elections, maybe, for example? Like, I think the economy was very important in 2024, but obviously you had many controversial statements that have been said in the past, and I think a lot of people maybe overlooked that this time around. So hopefully that makes sense. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate your question. I think I'm hearing your question as one that is about matters of character and how we treat one another. Is that fair? Yes. Okay. And really whether or not people now vote based on an issue rather than thinking about the whole person and what they see. Yeah. Also, just real fast, Curtis Yarvin is the name rather than Chris Yarvin, just for the sake. No worries. Just want to make sure that was out there. So, yes, I think that many people do vote for specific issues that they see where they think the relevant candidate is going to advance that specific thing they care about. I think what we've also seen, I think there's a fair amount of polling, although Professor Campbell will have to correct me on this if this isn't right. A lot of people in recent elections have voted not for somebody that they sort of felt wholeheartedly good about, but really the lesser of two evils. And so I think in that context, that's part of what ends up putting the question of character, I think, at a lower level for people. And also, I think we have to be honest about the fact that questions of character have come to apply across the political spectrum. So I think it is an important point to say that President Trump lies a lot. From my point of view, that is a real problem of character. The Biden administration, they lied to us, right? And so when you have lies across the board, then you're kind of lost for how to think about the question of character. From my point of view, it makes it all the more imperative that we restore the importance of character. That each of us in our own lives, private and public, every chance we have, speak up for integrity and kindness and compassion and a refusal to treat people in a bullying fashion. And that's, I think, all I really have to offer is to say, I think we can, little butterfly flapping the wings. I think we can reverse those norms, but it really does take intentional work to reverse those norms.
Okay, I see a lot of people, but I'll go to, and then I see your hand there. Go ahead.
Thank you so much for taking the time. I really love the way you set up the duck and the rabbit case. I was just kind of curious about the duck case too with Elon Musk. And I wanted to kind of hear your opinions about, I know they set an end date for the DOGE to be like July 4th, 2026. So I was curious how that fit into like that monarchical approach to what he's potentially doing. And I'm also curious with what you think about him purchasing X and putting all that information out on DOGE, on X, and how you think that also fits in. Thank you.
And I appreciate that question. So when I'm talking about Musk, I'm really talking about Musk rather than about President Trump, okay? And so I think it is important to separate the two of them, that Musk's agenda is different from President Trump's agenda. Musk has his own agenda. That's the really important point. So I think the date, the July 4th, 2026, that comes from President Trump. And he is very oriented towards the 250th anniversary of the revolution. And so if you take the rabbit case, right, that is a case which is about, here's how we're going to fundamentally transform how the federal government operates. And we're going to do that in order to restore the Constitution and the sort of integrity of the executive branch of government. And so it's that agenda that gets tied to the July 4th, 2026 date. Will Musk, in fact, be gone by then? That's another question, okay? And so that's where I think, there's sort of a gap between sort of the Musk agenda and the Trump agenda. And the other issue, though, is, the other thing that's really, really hard about trying to track what's happening with DOGE is that, oh gosh, sorry, there's just so much here, and it's hard stuff to talk about because a lot of information, but okay, the people that DOGE hired in the beginning, the first engineers that they brought on, like a heck of a lot of them, they're hackers. Like they've got hacker backgrounds. That is what they have spent their time doing, okay? So have they built backdoors to the federal government? I don't know. Do you know? They can. They have that power. That is within their reach. They could have done that. So they might be officially gone on July 4th, 2026, but we are not in a position to know whether they would actually be gone. Like, we cannot know that right now. And that, from my point of view, is the single biggest problem.
Okay, right here, and then, yeah. Okay, there's like three people in a row, so.
Okay, hello, Professor Allen. I'd like to take the moment to thank you, for today's discussion, but kind of going back to the very beginning of your statement today, you said you wanted to look at the bigger picture and kind of going from the analogy of the stream or the dam, there's a constant stream of information and misinformation online. So I just wanted to ask, one, where did you see the first initial start of division within both political parties in America, and how we could use that information to project the future of, Trump's administration going forward for the next 4 years?
Wow, thank you. You guys are asking big, hard questions. And I want to just say, for starters, it's true that, one of the things I find moving and hard about teaching college these days is that you guys have never seen anything other than this. It breaks my heart, truly. And so in terms of the history of polarization, it really starts in the 90s. And the facts are that the Republican Party polarized first, and the Democratic Party caught up with them. And by that I mean, if you measure from congressional votes and how much party discipline was there and how much did the party start to move apart on ideological positions, the Republicans moved first, and then the Democrats started catching up with them. It is certainly the case that the internet and social media have been a real exacerbator of polarization for a lot of different reasons, and that has to be part of the narrative. So it's a kind of complex mix of forces. There were also, I think, the political issues got harder because some of the questions of economic transformation got harder and things like that. The Cold War against the Soviet Union sort of really stabilized politics for a long period of time. There was a book published right after the end of the Cold War, the fall of the Berlin Wall, called The End of History, as if, now the Soviet Union was gone, liberal democracy ruled the day. I think, the better title for that book would have been The Start of History. History starts up again. History's been nice and kind of structured, frozen in the Cold War, and so it has been very dynamic. And so in that context, it's very ripe for a polarizing kind of politics. So those are some of the factors. And in terms of the sort of near-term politics, I expect, that we're likely to see a shift in 2026. That's kind of conventional in the first 2-year period. And the President Trump's administration certainly understands themselves to have 500 days to get done what they want to do. And so precisely because our politics are polarized and whipsaw, that actually also is part of the explanation for why everything is happening so fast and so aggressively, because there isn't any longer kind of sustained work across parties through Congress. It's really the legislature that should be synthesizing and smoothing out decision-making over time. And that's why, from my point of view, it's so important to rebalance toward Congress, help Congress be healthy, help Congress function better, because that's what we need to restabilize our politics.
And the connection to the voting rules is that Congress then changes in terms of how it behaves and is less gridlocked.
Exactly.
Okay, you right there, you've been very patient, and then I'll move to some other sections. I'm not ignoring the other sections. Go ahead.
Professor, thank you very much for being here. Duck 2 is terrifying to me. Where we're at right now, I think, is more in the world of scary. There's things happening, but I don't know if we've hit points where, like, the world is ending. What do you see as the red line? How are we going to know when we've hit the point when we need to, like, flood Washington, retail? What's the red line?
Is it possible to put my slides back up again? Are they there? That's sort of what I meant with the indicators part, to ask people to track those things. So just coming back, here again. Adherence to Supreme Court decisions, that's a red line. All right, that one's just going to be really, really important, and we have to figure out what happens. And so, Musk exiting for real, but then also having verifiability that there aren't back doors and that there are, operational security people, digital security people in the government who are not beholden to Musk, who have the independent capacity to produce verification and validation, that there aren't back doors, that cryptography is functioning appropriately, and so forth. So in other words, we really do need a technology apparatus in the government that we can trust. And if we don't have that, game's over.
Anyone over this direction?
First of all, thank you for being here. My question is a little bit more about how we can apply this in our personal lives. My older brother, I play video games with all the time, I feel like has become more involved in like that right-wing Twitter sphere. And he lives in LA, and he was really frustrated with Karen Bass and Gavin Newsom's like response to all the fires. But I feel like our perspectives on just like the facts of the situation, obviously I totally understand where he's coming from, but when our perspectives on issues and our not even opinions, but the information we have about them is so differing, how do you bring those two perspectives closer and have like meaningful, productive conversation about issues?
Yeah, and it's a great question. So, this is hard. It speaks to the previous question too about the way in which our media ecosystem has, polarized people by putting people in different kinds of information contexts and the like. And I think, I tend to focus on three things in response to that. I mean, the first is just relational, that I do think, it's really important to learn the techniques that make conversation possible even across those great divides. So I am always talking about the importance of being able to repeat back to people what they've said, just to check first, like, did I actually hear you correctly? I think this is what you think, is that right? And you don't kind of proceed in the conversation until you've actually both gotten that ironed out. Also, relatedly, stepping back from moments of conflict to try to kind of get under them to figure out what values are motivating you in thinking about that, and then putting all the values on the table and talking about the values together, because typically you can find some shared values, and then you can start to build from those again. So that's one set of things, like kind of conversational techniques. When I was talking about the different tech paradigms there, the plurality paradigm has a lot of developers right now who are working on algorithms that change the dynamics of our information ecosystem. So algorithms that do a better job of actually exposing people to information from different kinds of ecosystems, and also algorithms that support fact-checking, et cetera, sorting out, but in a way that doesn't require top-down control. So the one positive thing I will say about X is, I don't know if you have seen the community notes function on it, but which is basically doing fact-checking and vetting based on opinions in the community. But what it does is it surfaces the sort of different poles of opinion. So when there's a kind of controversial point that's made, then what's the sort of spectrum of opinion about how valid that is? So that then when you, the reader, see that controversial thing, you're always getting it with that kind of map about sort of where it fits in an opinion landscape. And by giving us more context in that way, it helps us start to process information more effectively and become less susceptible to just being kind of driven one way or the other because of siloed information. So we could literally design our information ecosystem in ways that would address these problems. And that's part of what's at stake in trying to transition from the current kind of dominant tech bros model for technology development to the plurality paradigm. Again, Taiwan is the best example of its use.
Great. Right here.
Thanks so much for being here. I have two questions. You can answer either or both. My first question, I'm a sociologist. I'm curious what kinds of social scientific research you want to see on bridging divides and building super majorities. Like, what do you think we need to know in order to move forward with cross-ideological, cross-class, cross-racial communities? And then my second question is connected to tech. I'm curious how you think we as individuals should relate to some of the new technologies that are emerging, especially AI. I tend to take a very sort of like countercultural, almost like Luddite approach, and think that, I heard Zadie Smith say recently that these technologies are not worthy of the people she loves. I'm curious if you think we need to engage deeply with them in order to sort of reform them within, or if an appropriate response in some cases is being more sort of abstinent and less reliant on them in our own lives.
No, those are a set of great questions. Starting with the second one first, I do think we all should want to be in control over the place of technology in our lives. And so, some aspects of abstinence are probably valuable to that end. But ultimately for me, my own position is that these are tools that can bring real good to humanity, provided that we actually start from a development paradigm, a tech development paradigm, which puts the good of humanity first, as opposed to putting just profit first or just innovation generically understood first. And so it's really kind of changing the focus in that way. And when you change the focus in that way, then you can see all kinds of human problems that we want to solve collectively, that we would benefit from bringing technology to. And so I don't want to, shortchange the chance to do that. But so I would say, I would invite you, and happy to talk more, to sort of learn more about the kind of folks who are operating in this, broad community under the plurality paradigm, because what they're also trying to do is put the human at the center of thinking about tech development. So the first two paradigms, the NRX and the OpenAI paradigm, tend to want to replace or substitute the human, whereas what you can do with technology is instead complement the human, extend our capacities. Take Zoom as an example. Zoom doesn't replace any of us, right? Like, there's no sense in which there was a human function that was already occurring that Zoom replaces. Instead, It makes it possible for me to see my grandmother, right, when I call her. It really extends what's possible for us. And so we can really change the direction of what we're trying to build and pay more attention to how to get actual human value out of tools. So on the first, I like to talk about an ideal of a connected society being what we're trying to build with one another, where we have strong bonding relationships with communities of affinity, but also strong bridging relationships, and where we're trying to maximize the kind of formation, creation of bridging relationships. And so that supermajority sort of depends on those bridging relationships. And something that I've tracked in the literature and psychology more, but maybe sociology too some, is that there really are two kinds of bonding relationship. So a bonding relationship or a bonding tie is when you are connected to somebody where you have sort of multiple layers of connection, maybe same neighborhood, same religion, same race, et cetera, multiple lines of connection. There's sort of two categories of bonding relationship. There's a category where the internal group ties also support positive outgroup connections. And then there's another version of bonding relations which go the other direction and support opportunity hoarding and exclusionary behavior and so forth. So I think we need more research about the difference between those two kinds of ties and how they form and how to support them and sustain them. That's where I would really love to see more work.
Yeah, we have somebody in the back there, and I'm going to take two questions. Go ahead, and then there's a gentleman has been waiting very patiently. So I'll take those two, and then you want to answer those two together? Okay, and then we'll end. Thank you.
So my question may be on a little lighter note, but how did you decide duck, rabbit, good, evil, and who to decide which side was which side? Because I thought, what rabbit, when I first saw it. And so now I'm trying to figure out if I should go home tonight.
Rabbits are cute and furry, you know, and my kids like rabbits. I don't think they like ducks. I think it was as simple as that.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. My first thanks is actually to the university for having you as a speaker. As you said, you reconnected at the very beginning. What do we owe each other? We owe each other an honest conversation, and you brought it here to Notre Dame today, so thank you. Now, when DOGE, an individual, not really our government, is cutting 100,000, 200,000, 300,000 jobs, and they're then cutting all that spending related to it, isn't it true that they're not cutting the human need that exists out in our communities? They're just cutting those parts, and they're not then addressing the human need that will then not only suffer, but it will then increase, and we will have more needs. And wouldn't it be a good thing for us to get involved, as you said, at our state governments, because that's coming downhill, and it's going to hit the states, and the states are then going to feel some responsibility to do that, and they're not set up to do it. The other place it's going to come down harshly and in full force will be your charitable nonprofits that are under-resourced, don't have the staff, don't have the volunteers, certainly don't have the money to handle what's going on right now, let alone with all that's coming down. So my question to you is, would you encourage people to get involved in their local nonprofits and contribute?
Well, yes, absolutely. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Those were two softballs right at the end, for sure. Thank you so much.